So in this video, we're going to take a look at Daniel chapter 8. So I'll go ahead and begin reading verse 1. So in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that had appeared to me at first. In the vision, I was looking and saw myself in Susa, the capital, in the province of Elam, and I was by the river Ulai. I looked up and saw a ram standing beside the river. It had two horns. Both horns were long, but one was longer than the other, and the longer one came up second. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. All beasts were powerless to withstand it, and no one could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased and became strong. So we'll take a look here at the horned ram. So a couple of things to observe is by the end of chapter 8, during Belshazzar's reign, the following has occurred. So the first year is Daniel's vision of four beasts, the little horn, and one like a son of man. So we saw that in chapter 7. In the third year, Daniel's vision of a ram and a goat. So that's chapter 8. And in the final year, we'll have Belshazzar seeing the handwriting on the wall and dies. That's back in chapter 5. So you see there's been a little bit of reorganization here in terms of the chronology of these visions and dreams and things that are interpreted. So you got Belshazzar's last year before you get his first and his third year. So why Susa and the river Ulai? Once again, you kind of wonder, is Daniel mimicking the kind of opening of Ezekiel? And that's why a number of scholars will point out the influence of Ezekiel on the writing composition of Daniel. The powerful empire of the Medes and the Persians is probably what is being referred to here by this ram, especially the fact that it has two horns and one horn. It's probably the horn for the longer horn, the more pronounced horn is the Persians. And so they are able to charge westward and northward and southward. So in other words, the Medo-Persian, or primarily the Persian, was able to conquer a great deal of territory. Now we'll go into verse 5 through 10. As I was watching, a male goat appeared from the west, coming across the face of the whole earth, without touching the ground. The goat had a horn between its eyes. It came toward the ram with the two horns that I had seen standing beside the river, and it ran at it with savage force. I saw it approaching the ram. It was enraged against it and struck the ram, breaking its two horns. The ram did not have power to withstand it. It threw the ram down to the ground and trampled upon it, and there was no one who could rescue the ram from its power. Then the male goat grew exceedingly great, but at the height of its power, the great horn was broken, and in its place there came up four prominent horns toward the four winds of heaven. Out of one of them came another horn, a little one, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. It grew as high as the host of the heaven. It drew down to the earth some of the host and some of the stars, and trampled on them. So let's stop there at verse 10 and comment here on a few of these items. So we have a unicorn goat. So this a male goat coming in. The goat had a horn between its eyes. This becomes a four-horned goat and probably represents most likely the Hellenistic Empire, the empire of the Greeks. The first horn is Alexander the Great, who dies in 323 BCE. The four horns are the Diadochi, who are divided into the kingdom. Philip, Antigonus, Seleucus the First, and Ptolemy. So those are four kind of generals who kind of divvied up the land after Antiochus, after Alexander the Great had died. Alexander had an infant son who was supposed to succeed him, but that never does happen because these generals basically divide up the land. And there's a bit of a struggle as well at first between Seleucid and Ptolemy over its territory, and there's going to continue on being battles between the Seleucids and the Ptolemy that will involve the land of Judah. This is the second time that the author depicts Antiochus Epiphanes as a little horn. So we saw that in chapter 7, verse 8. So it's this derisive way of talking about Antiochus, who calls himself the manifested one, the exalted one, but he's really, in terms of the author's view, he's little, he's diminutive. Throwing down some of the host and some of the stars is symbolizing probably his challenge towards God. So this idea of growing exceedingly great and throwing down some of the host and some of the stars. So again, it has this kind of apocalyptic view of whatever Antiochus is doing on the earth is symbolic of what represents him in the celestial world, in the heavenly realm, and what's kind of happening there. While hosts do refer to celestial beings, stars can also be representative of rulers. So, of course, we see this in Isaiah, and of course, the story with of the Magi who see a star in heaven, think of a king being born in Judah. So stars represent kings, and so this idea of Antiochus, as it were, trampling down on powers, not only heavenly powers in a sense, but also by his conquering of other rulers. So Antiochus is then depicted as challenging God's order of the heavens and the earth. And this is again why he would be described as being arrogant. Next to verse 11 through 14. So even against the prince of the host, it acted arrogantly. It took the regular burnt offering away from him and overthrew the place of his sanctuary. Because of wickedness, the host was given over to it together with the regular burnt offering. It cast truth to the ground and kept prospering in what it did. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one that spoke, "For how long is this vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the grieving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled?" And he answered him, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state." So this kind of abomination of desolation is it's sometimes referred to. What we've got here kind of going on is Antiochus acts arrogantly against the prince or the commander of the host. So, is this supposed to be in some way against God himself, who is the host, that he is acting? It's this interesting way of calling God prince, but you think of God as king, not prince. But take a look at Joshua 5, 13, 14 about this language of prince being maybe commander of the host. Antiochus does stop the regular burnt offerings. This is during this time when he will want to stop Jews from practicing their faith. And what Antiochus does is, it's not so much that he's trying to get rid of Judaism, he's trying to exercise political power. And he has resistance towards unifying his kingdom from Jews who are not going to engage in the same kind of religious activities, religious pluralism that other parts of Antiochus' kingdom was willing to engage in. So Antiochus does try to push Hellenism, which he finds resistance amongst Jews for different reasons, although there's some adaptations of it. But one of the things he does is he ends up replacing different people to be high priests. And he does so basically on the grounds of whoever can pay him the biggest bribe. So someone will pay him a bribe, and then somebody else will come along and pay him a better bribe. But he eventually is going to, after he is rebuffed by the Romans from taking land in Egypt, and he's going to come back into Jerusalem, and he is going to take over the temple and stop it being a place that can be used for the worship of Yahweh. Instead, is going to make it a place where another god, kind of a god of the mercenaries that he have sent into Jerusalem, he's going to make the temple a place for a worship of that god. So anyway, so we're getting this description of what's stopping, how Antiochus is stopping aspects of Jews' worship of God. So he overthrows God's sanctuary. So this is the place of his sanctuary. Antiochus casts truth down to the ground. So this idea of, stopping what it is that Jews are believing about God and God's work in the world and God's sovereignty over the world, and the respect and worship that should be rendered to God. So he's casting that truth, as it were, to the ground. He's trying to prevent people from doing that. He's going to stop the Sabbath observance. So a holy one speaks in verse 13. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one that spoke. So it's a holy one might be thought of it as God, but maybe we just have ancestral beings, or celestial beings speaking here. It's not quite clear, but you would think that if you're asking about how long certain things have to happen, that the person answering should be God. And so the answer about how long this vision is going to occur is described as basically 2,300 days, 14. So why this number of days? Well, is it from 171 to 164 BCE? I mean, is it that particular time that the author has in mind? So in other words, does he see really the abomination starting not so much with the stopping of the offering of sacrifices to Yahweh in the temple, but it really begins when Onias III, who was high priest, was murdered. Is that when it happens? Or again, is this number just symbolic? That is it that 7 is symbolic for a complete time until the temple is rededicated? So we getting some kind of numbering system here to do that. So it's not really clear why 2,300 is the number that should be indicated here. It is interesting that we've got this period of time. We've got 2,300 days. Some may even say it's 1,150 days, almost as long as the length of time that we will see recorded in chapter 7 and later on chapter 12. So basically about 3.5 years. So, it's interesting when we look at the writings of First Maccabees, the author of First Maccabees, which may be a work that's written later than Daniel was. For that author, the period of time in which the sanctuary, the temple, had been desecrated by him was exactly 3 years. So, how are we to divide up this time? It's kind of a curious number to be looking at. 2,300 evenings and mornings. Is it 2,300 days, or amounting to less days? All right, we'll then look here 15 through 21. So when I, Daniel, had seen the visions, I tried to understand it. Then someone appeared standing before me, having the appearance of a man, and I heard a human voice by the Uli calling, Gabriel, help this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I became frightened and fell prostrate. But he said to me, understand, O Son of Man, that the vision is for the time of the end. As he was speaking to me, I fell into a trance, face to the ground. Then he touched me and set me on my feet. He said, listen, and I will tell you what will take place later in the period of wrath, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. The male king is the king of Greece, and the great horn between its eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. So I'll just stop there. A couple of things. So Daniel tries to understand the vision, but needs assistance. He sees someone like a human, but who is the human voice that he hears is not quite clear. Someone having the appearance of a man. He hears a voice, but we don't know who the voice is. The man, my man, the man, Gaber, my man is God, comes to Daniel. We have a Gabriel coming, and addresses him as Son of Man. So, in other words, here, Son of Man is just you who are human, so much like what we would see in Ezekiel. But this is not like the one like a Son of Man in back in chapter 7 of Daniel. So we don't want to get confused with just the use of this phrase, Son of Man. In Daniel is not the Son of Man, but he is referred to as a human here with this expression. And so he addresses him and says the vision is about a time of an end. So it's not so much about the end of time, but an ending of a time, of a period of time. So it's not about the end of the world, but it is about how one particular moment in time is going to come to an end. Then he is touched. He falls to the ground, falls into trance, and he's touched him and set him on feet. Touching the recipient of a divine revelation is a frequent trope in the Old Testament. So anyway, so we're going to get several of these different things pointed out here in up to verse 21. I'll just mention here that the male goat is again identified as the king of Greece. We've already had the ram has been identified as the Median and the Persia. The male goat is the king of Greece, and then we have that horn that was broken is describing how Alexander the Great's kingdom or empire was then divided up. So I'm going to leave it here at this point up to verse 21, 22.